This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, good evening, good morning, everyone. I'm deputising for Priya, as she's unable to make it this morning. And we've got a really interesting agenda today. We've got a couple of guest speakers. We've got Astrid Wynne from Tech Buyer and also David Bradley as well. So Astrid's going to talk about the data center sustainability white paper published by the DCA. And David's going to talk about the ISO IEC 31.
Will now be recorded.
So just to start off, just to mention a few things that Priya wanted me to just go through. First off, if you haven't signed up already, please sign up to the DCF sustainability mailing list. We've got some work streams that are going to be started after the regional summit, so that everyone can get notified of when those are going to be scheduled for. Then please sign up to the mailing list so you don't miss any of the new work streams and getting involved with those. And just to remind everyone, we've got 3 work streams that we're going to be kicking off. We've got the energy, heat and water that Aaron Wenhoff is going to be leading. We've got a construction work stream with Stephen Bird, who's here today. Hi, Stephen. And we've also got a metrics work stream as well. I know Rob's away at the moment. He can't make it. So if the emails are here in the meeting notes, and so I will, if you haven't got a link to the meeting notes, I will put it in the chat in a minute. And then we've also got the top level sustainability initiative. There's another work stream that's going to be talking about how we can work with other groups, associations that are also working in the same area as data center facility sustainability. Also, we've got coming up later on in the year, May, June time, some tech talks around DCS sustainability. And if anyone's interested in presenting on any of the subjects around that, please reach out to Priya. I'll be happy to give you some time to present your topic. And as I say, that's happening a little bit later on in the year. Okay, so Astrid, are you sort of ready to be able to present your?
Yeah, can you give me permission to share, please, and I'll get the slide deck up.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Right. Right, I'm going to stop sharing, and I am going to give you make presenter.
Yay, success. Okay, there we go. Right, can everybody see this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so this is a bunch of stickers that kind of explains where the document I'm going to take you through comes from. So I was the lead author, and I work for a company called Tech Buyer, which predominantly deals with product life extension for servers. So our background would be circular economy, but also energy efficiency for servers of multiple makes and models and generations. Also informing the document were the members of the DCA Special Interest Group, which is why their stickers on here. The Data Center Alliance is made up of contractors that serve the enterprise data centers in the UK and Europe. So you get a lot of consultants in there, a lot of building specialists, people who are specialised in load balancing, energy supply, but no end-to-end data center managers really. It's not a cloud organisation, it's an enterprise organisation. And so what we were trying to do was create a document that would be of use to the people who were serving the sector as well as the sector itself. And then IEMA's in there because I have a qualification from the Institute of Environmental Management and Assessment, which is the closest thing that we've got to a Chartered Institute of Environmentalists in the UK. And I have a Chartered Environmentalist qualification from them and from the Society of Environmentalists. I mention that because what we were trying to do is we were trying to do more than just energy efficiency with this document and more than just materials efficiency. We were trying to take it outside of those usual well-trod parameters and take it more into environmental sustainability, and then take it further than that into social sustainability and a little bit about governance. The document was designed partly as a call to action, but mostly as a living document. So as you can imagine, creating a document like this, the first edition is the most difficult to create. We articulated it as 5 actions to create positive change, because we're aware that a lot of people don't know how to measure success, and they don't know where to start, and they're reluctant to start for that reason. So it was trying to encourage people to feel positive about the things that they could do. We also wanted to create a document that would generate discussion, that would have people saying, well, yeah, there's that, but you could do it better, or you could go further here, or what you're talking about there is something that would have worked 2 years ago, but now there's something else that's better that comes along. We wanted to do that because we think that creating discussion and sharing ideas is the pathway to success and sustainability. We generally don't really have a roadmap for making a completely sustainable sector, because nobody does. So the more discussion that we have, whilst trying to have a sense of positivity and a sense of actions that people can take right now today, the better. So 5 actions, because 5 is not too many to understand and not too many to remember. The first one is to make a net zero pledge. We articulated that in the document as the net zero imperative, because we felt that it was the best way to articulate actual reductions in energy usage, actual reductions in carbon emissions, and it's an accepted methodology that measures that. There's not a lot of argument there because there are a series of steps that are associated with it. Circular economy practice came in because it addresses the materials issues that go around the energy issue in data centers, things like water, critical raw materials, and all the others, which we'll come to in a later slide. Creating a code of conduct was important because that kind of takes you beyond just environmental sustainability and answering, regulations or mitigating environmental harm. It actually looks at what positive influence you can have on your supply chain. That is now reflected in the legislation that we're seeing coming out of the EU. The Corporate Social Reporting Directive is taking things beyond just circular economy and reduced carbon, and it's saying that you need to be speaking to your supply chain, and you need to be getting your supply chain in order to ensure that you do not have any bad social effects as a result of doing business. So it would ask you to create a code of conduct that looks at child labour, for example, or looks at bonded servitude, looks at terms and conditions for the workers, to ensure that a company that lives by certain standards also is ethically responsible for certain standards. Carrying out an impact assessment, we've put that in because it's a good exercise in looking at all areas of sustainability and seeing what you're missing. People tend to focus on things that they're doing well or things that they're worried about, but creating an impact assessment which looks at communities, customers, as well as social and environmental aspects, really gives you an all-round view on that. And the last one was announced support of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We put that in because it's a global initiative, because everybody recognises it, but also because it's one of the few that articulates positive change. So it's a really nice celebratory way of getting involved with sustainability, and it has benefits inside of companies as well. So make a net zero pledge. We pinched this off John Laban. This is an overview of the greenhouse gases, their global warming potential, their atmospheric lifetime, and we highlighted the fact that almost all of these are in the data center supply chain. So it's something that is really pertinent to the sector. Making a net zero pledge means getting a baseline of emissions over scope 1, 2 and 3, that's including supply chain emissions, in all the forms, not just in terms of materials, but also travel miles, commuting, everything. And then when you've got that baseline year, you create a pathway to get you to net zero by 2050, which would keep you in line with the science-based targets, with the goal of limiting global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. In amongst that, you need to set an interim target, so a certain percentage by a certain year. The idea is that you get as much efficiency into your program as possible to reduce the need for electricity, ultimately materials, because even if you have green energy, there's still a material component on that. Then you look at green energy supply, get that down as much as possible. Then you look to your supply chain emissions and you make choices that are informed by the carbon emissions associated with your supply chain. And when you've done all that work, then you offset the rest by looking at carbon capture or carbon absorption. Integrating circular economy, we looked at water usage and waste to heat, and we also looked at critical raw materials, which we think are going to be a growing issue in the next few years. There's a lot of focus on carbon at the moment, but the answers that people have got to reduce carbon emissions tend to rely on critical raw materials. So that's a list from the EU. The US has its own list. These materials that we're talking about are present in high quantities in information communication technology hardware. They are that particular sector. The production of that is growing. There are a lot of carbon emissions associated with the production of that material throughout the supply chain. Their critical raw materials are also in demand from renewable energy infrastructure as well. We're talking about things like cobalt, lithium, anything in a battery, anything in processing. So you've got two answers to your carbon problem, putting pressure on these critical raw materials, which are either in low supply or they're in sparse supply. So there might be a lot of it, but it's difficult to get out of the raw material. And there's also a political element of that. So some of these materials are produced in politically unstable regions or regions with whom areas that operate in the West may well have problems in the near future. We also wanted to look at this code of conduct. So we gave some key pointers on how you would go about this. So you need to identify areas that are most relevant to your business and sector, and the base information for this will come from the UN. So modern slavery might be an issue if you're operating in areas of the world where that's a risk. Same with freedom of association, working hours, child labour, etc. A good shortcut is to consult similar documents from the sector that you work in. So the Responsible Business Alliance is a great resource for anybody working in the electronics sector, and there are similar kind of cheat sheets, if you like, from construction organisations as well. Write a code of conduct that your company can agree with and sign up to. Share this code of conduct with your suppliers and stakeholders, asking them to sign, and where possible, conduct site visits to check that the code's being observed. Again, just to reiterate, we were writing this for companies that could be relatively small, so their ability to go out and conduct site visits might be quite low. However, if you're signing up to one of the bigger organisations that organise codes of conduct, like the Responsible Business Alliance, they will have had members that did their homework already. There's a limited amount of guaranteed success with a code of conduct. You can't ensure that each one of your suppliers actually does this, but the more people that ask the question in the right way, the more suppliers are going to realise that this is an issue that customers are interested in, and ultimately you would hope that it's a competitive advantage to doing things in the right way. The last one that we had was, the next one we had was carry out an impact assessment. We looked at the B Corp impact assessment, which is free to use and is online and is available through that link. B Corp tends to be for smaller companies, SMEs, find that a useful resource. There have been issues in the press with the whole B Corp methodology, notably with Nespresso and other companies that environmentalists have believed don't always behave in the right way, who are certified B Corps. But again, this is a tool as much as anything else. So conducting an impact assessment is described in these bullet points. And it's a kind of good wide-angled view on what your impacts are. And this is a little bit more about the UN Sustainable Development Goals. For anybody who doesn't know, they were created in 2015. They were signed up to by all the UN member states, and they create measurable targets to achieve by 2030. There are 17 goals which look at 17 linked areas of sustainable development, and underneath each of those goals will be a set of measurable targets. When businesses are aligning to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, they want to look at the targets underneath the goal rather than the goal itself. So if you look at goal 13, which is climate change, that's an excellent example. Most people think, okay, climate change, well, I'm providing green energy, or I am looking at energy efficiency, therefore I can align to that goal. When you look at the targets underneath goal 13, it's more about climate adaptation and a little bit about education. It's not to do with energy efficiency. So we would advise that people understand that before they align to the UN Sustainable Development Goals with their own set of targets that they run over a period of time. Okay, so that's a whistle-stop tour of the content. You may have the document in your email if you want to read a little bit more about what the document says. What I'm mostly interested in is asking you guys a series of questions on the next iteration of this document and how we can improve on it and possibly integrate it into work that other bodies are doing. I don't really see much point in reinventing the wheel. Also, I think the more different organisations are aligned on messaging, the stronger the message becomes. So the first question is net zero the right way to go? I've got a spelling mistake in here and here. I'm sorry. So do we want to be mentioning those other gases? Also, is net zero too stringent? Is it too much of a narrow thing to the EU? Would we be looking at, I don't know, climate neutral or carbon neutral or something like that? Would that be easier for people to go after? On the environmental impact, we kind of had a starter batch of impacts. In the document, we mentioned IT equipment utilisation, IT equipment efficiency. We mentioned water usage effectiveness, carbon usage effectiveness, renewable energy factor. But are there others that we could be mentioning here? Are there other KPIs that we feel need to be built in to best practice in terms of sustainability? Codes of conduct. Do we need to review this section? Do we need to create one that is really relevant to the data center sector? Would it be a useful thing to do that so that there's something that's really targeted at this sector that people can pick up and use to save them doing the homework? The impact assessment that we used at the time was the B Corp assessment because it was the easiest one to get people started on. EcoVadis is now becoming more prevalent in the sector. Should we be replacing B Corp with EcoVadis? Should we be coming down in the middle and describing something that covers both? What are people's thoughts on that? And then the UN Sustainable Development Goals. The guidance that we gave was applicable to small and medium-sized companies across multiple sectors that were all part of the data center supply chain. Is that approach applicable for cloud providers? Is it applicable for other organizations that may be a lot larger? Or should there be other advice that we're offering? And that's it.
Right, thanks.
Okay,
Perfect.
Astrid, I was going to say, it's David Bradley here. I'm doing the presentation next. I can show you some of the other KPIs that are coming out of what's called ISO IEN 30134. It's one of the presentation slides I've got. So you'll see the other KPIs that are coming on and above PUE, CUE, WE, etc.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Okay.
Does anybody, shall I put the slide back up and we have a discussion, or should we get on with David's thing first and then?
No, I mean, I think let's have a look at the questions that you've raised, and then David can elaborate on some of the metrics that are being considered. But I, for one, net zero, I think, is what we should be aiming at. I don't think we should be aiming for anything less. However difficult it is, I personally think we should be going for net zero. Anybody else? Any other thoughts in the group?
I agree. I agree with you, Mark. And I think, you asked if the other gases are significant. So I think the big picture for like short term net zero, everybody thinks of carbon, especially here in the US, or what I see. When you're thinking once everybody gets closer to that, I think that's when you kind of start elaborating everything else that goes into it to, keep expanding the sustainability. But definitely, I loved seeing that. I actually took a screenshot. I hope you don't mind, of your chart with all the other things that we don't think about, that I haven't thought about, definitely, that do play a big role.
Thank you. One of the things that I was thinking when I was looking at net zero is that a lot of times people equate carbon emissions with just the energy supply. And that's one of the uses of the tables. It shows people that it's not just the energy supply. I don't know enough about it, but I'm also wondering about backup systems, how much work's being done on making them more sustainable in amongst power purchase agreements for renewables, for example, and then roughly what the split is in terms of usage between those backup systems and the day-to-day energy supply. Does anybody have a view on that?
I mean, KO data have implemented using an HVO fuel, biofuel, as a way of reducing the impact of running generators, because generators do have to be tested. So there is there is that. It's not they're not just there waiting and not being used. They are being used and tested. So there is a certainly something that should be considered. But certainly biofuel is one thing, but I'm sure there are other methods of backup power systems that are being worked on. Stein, what are your thoughts on this? Have you got a
Interesting question. Well, what can we do on the backup systems? And we had already investigated that, and the biggest impact is not to build the backup systems, because that's not the scope 1 emissions of the backup systems, but the whole generator plant itself is the biggest carbon footprint. And it's a strange thing in data centers, of course, because I also in data centers for 15 years now. But you have to start thinking about that, the stupidity of all those generators. Can we do it smarter as OCP?
Yeah, I agree. It's have
You
workloads
mean,
in different
yeah,
locations could be
yeah, sort
employed.
of load balancing.
Yeah,
Is that what you mean?
try to find a solution IT-wise that a facility down, as a facility goes down, that's not an issue anymore, or that we can live with a facility down. That we define our digital infrastructure, because that's the sustainable digital infrastructure we have to develop as a utility, and that's where we have to go back. Now we are reasoning everything from the data center facility is the failure, but the digital infrastructure should be up and the data center can fail. So that's step up of the thoughts of OCP 10 years ago, that the server is not the single point of failure anymore. It's the total set of servers is the machine, and one server can fail. So, and that you can also do is level higher on data center level, I think, if we create an ecosystem which is more sustainable. But it's, yeah, that's more a thought. Yeah.
Okay. So environmental impact, we actually had the ISO 30134 included in the KPIs of the full document, but I think we had water usage effectiveness, carbon usage effectiveness, energy reuse factor, IT equipment utilization and IT equipment efficiency in there. But I'll wait to see David's talk to see if there is anything else that's come up through the next iteration of that ISO. Other environmental impacts that we could have included, although I don't know if there's any point at the moment, is things like land use change and the impact on local biodiversity, whether there's any place for data centers to have a positive impact on biodiversity, or locate on brownfield sites as a preference over greenfield sites or something like that. Has anybody heard of anything along those lines that would be worth including, or do we think it's best to just stick within the parameters that are known and understood by the sector before we move out?
I think
it's valid.
Sorry, go ahead.
I think it's valid to look outside the normal things, because it's urgent enough. Of course, the good thing is to understand where the biggest impact can be. Otherwise, it is used as cherry picking, and then we don't have an impact. So, yeah, there should be some key guidance where we can make the biggest impact. That can outside the box idea. That can be outside the box ideas, of course. But yeah, biodiversity is one. Of course, you see green facades, you see green roofing, you see maybe wooden data centers. What shall we do different? Yeah.
I mean,
I suppose you could, yeah.
I mean, providing guidance is what OCP is about, and best practice. we don't set standards. We give guidance and the ability for users to make up their own minds of how to go about it. So these are the forums where and having a white paper like this is a great starting point. But sort of drilling down is where I think where OCP can do the most good. With the work streams that we've got set up, if we can get down to the detail in around one of the work streams is about energy, heat, and water. Hopefully, we're going to get guidance and white papers coming out of that on how best to go about those resources being best used and not to have an environmental impact. So too much of one. We're always going to have an environmental impact.
Yeah, I'm just. Has anybody read any papers or seen any work done on biodiversity impact? I'm just thinking in abstract, if you've got a load of heat generated by a building, it's going to affect the environment, the immediate environment around that building, and whether that would have a knock-on effect on insect and plant life, especially if there's water going through and then that heated water goes out into the water supply. There might be a risk there. Has anybody heard of any research done on that?
No, I've not.
Only energy reuse factor that comes out of ISO 30134 about using the heat, the wasted heat for district heating, not necessarily for the environmental reasons.
But if it's not taken for district heating, where does that wastewater go? Where does the heated water go?
I mean, there's certainly a benefit for heated water to go into lakes. I mean, Green Mountain have done this to improve the fish stocks in a particular lake in Norway. So it can be harmful, but if it's controlled, then that is a positive effect from the heat reuse. So I've heard of the positives. I've not heard of the negatives. Yeah.
But I like biodiversity myself, so it's really a topic, and of course when we develop data centers, we also understand the social impact, that there is maybe a box in the landscape there, but you can also make part of the investment bringing back more diversity or making it more solid by investing in the surroundings or next door.
Yeah, I mean there are certain easy wins for restoring habitats, which I know about from my home life. When you're talking about rewilding, for example, you don't need to rewild huge areas of land. You can do that in rural areas by introducing green corridors through hedgerow and other fairly low impact things. Not mowing the lawn so that you get wildflowers to encourage pollinators would be another one. Would it be worth me contacting people at DEFRA and saying, is there any best practice guidance for any organisation building where you could just create a few easy wins?
I think there's definitely scope here. I mean, we've got a heat reuse project, and that's looking for, we've now got a map listing, all these, different projects where heat has been reused. We don't have anything around biodiversity. We haven't talked about coming up with guidance, but we should be asking, we should be encouraging that to be part of it. So yeah, I think this has got some scope for sure. I mean, I've heard of bees, beehives being located. I think it was in Ireland. I saw a report. The beehives. I don't know if it was Google one of the other hyperscalers, but they were putting those within the boundaries or, you know, around anyway the site.
But there are definitely guidelines for biodiversity.
Yeah, I mean, there's mixed news on beehives, aren't there? Because they tend to eradicate all the other pollinators. So there are about 7 pollinators, not just bees. And if you don't create enough habitat for the bees, you're basically making them take territory off other pollinators. So you'd have to manage it. You'd have to know, you know, what you were doing. Which I'm sure Google have done their homework. But I'm just saying that we should, like, yeah, we should be careful about guidance there.
Yes, I mean, it should come from a, you know, like a national body like DEFRA, or I mean, that's the UK one, but I mean, there's obviously other international, I mean, other, you know, I'm sure the Netherlands have got a similar organisation that, you know, is trying to, you know, control the environment and how it's used.
Yeah. I can also ask IEMA, because they're full of people who look at waterways and fields and species. They might have some experts that can give us some guidance as well.
Yeah, I have to look it up also from my side. But what I understand from biodiversity, it's not throwing all kind of different flowers in an area. It's not creating biodiversity. It should stick to the original plants.
Yeah, you want the original species mix. So yeah, I live in a rural area, you know, and when we put the wildflower meadow in, we had to go and harvest it from next door's wildflower meadow to make sure that we put the right stuff in. So that, yeah. So, and the same when you plant trees, you look at the local mix of trees and what's native to the area. Okay. So is there anything else on environmental impact? Because I'm conscious of time.
Yeah, I thought we'd give David like last sort of 15 minutes or so.
Wonderful. I'll stop sharing.
All right, if you want to give me the screen.
Yeah, sure. Okay, you should have that, David.
Okay, can you see this?
Yep.
Okay, let me just. Okay, so what I'm going to present is a presentation that I did actually on 16th of February at the Data Center Alliance 10 by 10 update in London. I work for Honeywell. There's a colleague of mine on the call as well, Alpesh Saraya. I look after the data center vertical within Honeywell building solutions. We're looking after, you know, solutions around BMS, fire and security, etc. But this is you know, talking about the standards that are coming out for capable sustainability metrics and the directives that are coming down the way. Alpesh, do you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Yes, hi everybody, nice to meet you. I'm Alpesh Saraya. I'm global leader for the data center vertical at Honeywell Building Technologies. Nice to meet you. Thank you for inviting us here.
Thank you. So this really is setting the scene around what are the metrics, following on from the previous talk, what are the metrics that are within the ISO IEC 30134, and basically that in the EU we have got these bodies, the EU Taxonomy, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, the Energy Efficiency Directive, and the Climate Neutral Data Center Pact that might well use these metrics that are coming out from ISO 30134. So let's have a look at what the metrics are. If I can go to the next slide, if it works. Why isn't it working? Just bear with me, why is it not working? Maybe I have to do it this way. Can you see this?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Yeah, you can. Okay, right. Sorry. So let me just go back to there. So in ISO 30134, we've already gone through the various the metrics that are there at the moment, but PUE is obviously the one which is the power usage effectiveness, renewable energy factor. So this is where obviously we're starting to use solar, your wind farms, and the battery energy storage, etc. And that's getting more and more prevalent. The ITEE, which has already been mentioned, the ITEU already been mentioned, energy reuse factor, which is what we were just talking about, cooling efficiency ratio, which hasn't been mentioned yet tonight, CUE, carbon usage effectiveness, and water usage effectiveness. So if we look at the corporate sustainability directive as the first standard that's coming down the line, what we had is that in November the 28th, 22, the EU Council approved the Corporate Sustainability Directive. And basically what this is that because this was just before Christmas, people are not really aware of this coming down the line and the time pressures behind this. The idea behind the obligations is that we have to set clear ESG targets. We have to annually publish the progress, okay? And the focus on sustainability is mandatory, okay? And must be embedded in the company long-term vision, etc. The idea then is that you have to have implementation plans in relation to the transition, and you have to then obviously set your climate neutrality by 2050. So your first question that you were just asking, should we be going for net zero, is being driven by these sustainability directives that are coming down the road. Also, you have to show how the sustainability matters affects your company, and you have to set your greenhouse gas emission targets. Now, when does this apply? Basically, in January the 1st, 24, large EU public company entities that were already reporting on the non-financial reporting directive, but basically companies that reside in the EU that are more than 500 employees will have to comply with this standard come January the 1st, 24. And that amounts to 66,000 EU companies, not necessarily just in data center, but across the board. Then in January the 1st, 2025, we've got large EU companies that were not presently reporting on the non-financial reporting directive have to comply. Then January the 1st, 26, basically small to medium enterprise companies. And then in 28, non-EU companies have to fall into this. The Energy Efficiency Directive, what is this? The Energy Efficiency Directive is basically a directive that was amended in 2018 and sets the rules for the energy efficiency targets leading up towards 2030 targets. What are the obligations? It focuses on implementing an energy management system as a default obligation. It gives stricter planning and follow-up of comprehensive assessments. Okay, so you have to have a full, monitoring facility within your site so that you can actually report on that. And you have to have stricter requirements with regards to competencies of your energy service providers, your energy auditors, your energy managers, and your installers. And finally, it applies to all companies above 1,000 square meters that are non-residential, okay, and they're subject to renovation and accessibility to having energy performance contracts. And finally, the requirement for EU companies to report on the energy efficiency investments that they are making as part of this energy efficiency directive. So what does this mean basically? What it means is that this directive is forcing you to reduce energy consumption by 9% by 2030. It's telling you to reduce your primary energy efficiency targets from 36% to 39%, okay? And it's telling you basically that, you need to report this METO factor, which is 1 million tons of oil equivalent, and you'll see this in the press coming out more and more. So what does this all mean for businesses? Just to give you a flavour. Well, basically what it means is that on and above the non-financial reporting directive, okay, the sustainability directive is telling us to look at environmental protection, which is what we've just been talking about, social responsibility and treatment of employees, respect for human rights, anti-corruption and bribery, and diversity on company boards. And then additionally to the CSRD, it's asking us to basically look at the sustainability risks. It's telling us to look at the be forward thinking about the information, including targets and progress, and then reporting in line with these regulations and the EU taxonomy. So you have to sort of follow the rules that they're given. And basically, the bottom line here is that if you don't follow this or you aren't aware of this, there could be sanctions. Okay, and we're not aware of what they are yet, but we're, this is obviously evolving during the course of this year, and it's for us to be mindful of this. The takeaway that basically of all this is that we should act now and start collecting data, because if sanctions are imminent and we're not collecting data and we're not being mindful of what's coming down the line from an EU perspective, it's going to affect the EU. And Alpesh, you reside in Silicon Valley. What are you seeing in the States?
Yeah, so I think we can say that, like California back in the 70s with the California Air Resources Board and a lot of the EPA at the national level were adopted as a result of that leadership. We've seen Europe in recent years, of course, with GDPR taking a foothold, and then US basically informally adopted it because everybody has these days a global footprint. And similarly in data center, European Union is taking this formality leadership. It's not quite here. I think there's a lot of governmental at the state and federal levels trying to make their way, but it's not yet as crisp as this. But since many of the brands that I think OCP represents are in fact global, it behooves everybody to take note of this as the canary in the mine, and then to really rapidly see that if you have the foundation of this reporting, then there are probably some nips and tucks that you have to do through other regions, but you have to get ahead of this to really have a perspective, of avoiding these sanctions.
I have one
So
question, David. Sorry, quickly.
Sorry.
In one of the slides, you mentioned about a reduction of energy by 9%. Do you know if that's by? Is that by data center, if we're talking about a colo, or is that by the company overall, who may have multiple colos?
I would say that's by company. I can't be certain in my answer, but I would imagine it's by company, because you're actually going into the directive as the company, not as a site of your company. So it would be across your portfolio.
But if you increase the number of, sorry.
No, you go first.
Okay, just to say, so that's by 2020's power consumption.
Can we go back to that slide?
Yeah.
David?
I think it was 2030.
Yeah,
Right,
2030 compared to 2020.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have a footprint of colos in 2020. You now increase the number of colos because you're offering an expanded service. Does that mean you've got to keep the 9? You've got to have this 9% reduction still, even though you've increased your footprint, your estate?
That was So in when you report to the UK government, you get to use an intensifier. So you can either divide it by head count, or you can divide it by turnover, so that you get a like-for-like figure. Is that what's happening here, or is it an absolute number?
I need to look at the directive, but it's what they report on within the directive. What we've done is that the directives are multiple pages thick, and what we're trying to do is summarize it on a single slide here. We'll have to look at the devil in the detail, but I would imagine that this is obviously what's stated in the directive as it sits today.
Yeah, I would say, again, we'd have to look into it officially in more detail, but it should be on a normalized basis. That's the only way you can compare, right? So the baseline for whatever megawatts that were under management back in 2020 should be the metric that should be compared. And then, of course, that market may have grown for them, and so their megawatts or square meters would have expanded, but then it would be scaled with that level of efficiency gain.
Mm. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, thanks. And there was mention also we've got non-EU businesses as well. I think it was mentioned in one of the slides.
And that's
Uh,
reminiscent of GDPR, right?
yeah.
Because at first it started to take hold, and then basically everybody that had a footprint of dealing with any sort of the supply chain or downstream had to comply just by extension.
So a Google or Meta, would they be considered non-EU companies? So they don't need to comply until 2028 if they've got a
I think
facility.
it would be better to ask them, depending on how they're organized. There might be legal entities in Europe. I don't know the detail of how they're organized.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Okay.
But that's only one. That's only one directive. That's only the CSRD. What about the EED? If they're going down that road, there's a, so these directives, they should be aware of it, of what's coming down the road, and see where they're leading. Okay. Now, one thing to.
Can I ask a question? Sorry. Can you a little bit clarify how you think this will have impact, significant impact on getting to net zero? For me, it's I see all those standards and it's good to have standard metrics because then you can compare a little bit. But in the end, it's a massive administration, and what we are aiming is net zero, and that's I'm struggling with that.
Yeah, it's a proper question, Stein. But I mean, I think if we can kind of reference that foundational fact of I think Lord Kelvin, if you don't start measuring, you can't really start improving anything, right? And so I think we've got to get a baseline assessment of where things are, both from a design build in terms of data center, but also arguably, the vast majority of the carbon emission and the OPEX is in fact during the operational phase, right? So if you just look at the breakdown, maybe that's a topic for a future discussion if that's not been addressed. But there's actually quite a minimal amount of carbon, including embedded carbon, during the build. So when you actually haul in all the capex and critical assets, but yet the problem is that the industry doesn't really visualize how to employ the optimization during the life cycle, which is when most of the carbon is actually emitted. And most of that, in fact, is, of course, I think we mentioned in procuring renewable sources of energy. That has probably the single biggest, easiest impact. You throw more money at it, right, in the near term to be able to go and claim that green footprint. So it's a really case of setting that baseline and being aware of where the problem scenarios are, and this is forcing that function, right? So that everybody starts to see where they are now and then where they need to be, and it ties very much so financially, right? In terms of how is this carbon tax and REX going to play into this picture? It really needs to start having people step back. And as they go and do the scale out, and we hear all this AI, ML, and ChatGPT is going to drive even further. We hear word on the data center build. But how do we do this so that we can take into account the next decade's worth of challenges and have a roadmap? That's the key to walk into it.
Okay, but to add to that, I'm referring to a presentation John Laban always gives, and he uses he uses my graph in that presentation, and that's showing that OCP was already 10 years way ahead of all this, with virtualization, skipping all the redundant parts out of a server, and getting more servers in a rack. So does OCP need? I like more the OCP where it doesn't need all this stick. Because there are carrots enough for the organization if they understand where the sustainability can be gained, or the non-material skipping materials out of the stack. It's a huge saving and don't need the stick.
Yeah. No, definitely.
Right.
A lot of these directives are aimed at the broader business community, not just data center. And so we recognize, of course, OCP has been carrying this flagship message for quite a while.
Yeah, and we haven't, as a community, we haven't been very good at showing the evidence of the reduced embodied carbon. But that work has been being carried out, and we should be getting some information on that very soon, where we can compare the embodied carbon between certain OEM servers and OCP designed as well. So I think the more we can
that'll
get
go
out
a long
there,
ways, yeah, in terms of branding and awareness, yeah.
Yeah, we need that. But yeah, this year I think will be the year when we have more of that evidence. Okay.
One of the takeaways here, as I said, was collect data. So the idea is that if we just follow a couple of more slides, one of the things that we've done as an organisation is that we have said to ourselves, well, okay, every data centre will have a security bucket of data, a fire bucket of data, a BMS, a cooling bucket of data, a power bucket of data, and the IT. And basically across the OT IT layer, these could be various vendors. Okay, these could be separate systems, etc. And the idea here is that if you take all these subsystems and bring it up into a single pane of glass, which is what we are doing within our company, and representing the data as it should be represented, the KPIs to ISO 30134 in this instance, the reports as directives are asking for it, etc. It allows us to generate a dashboard for these organizations, giving them the data as it should be represented against what's coming out in the directives and these KPIs. So as you can see here are the KPIs. You've got down here the renewable energies. You've got here a roundup of alarms across all the subsystems so that you can immediately easily identify, sorry, I get the words right, easily identify exactly where a problem area is coming across the multiple subsystems, etc. And it allows us to look at all our portfolio under one banner, or one simple screen of rounding up of everything that's downstream. Alpesh, do you want to add anything else to that?
Yeah, I think you've covered it. So I think the main thing is start monitoring, and then we can start to optimize. And where the biggest bang can be over the whole life cycle is, in fact, during the operational phase. And so setting aside the sourcing of the renewable energy sources, then how do we get the actual data center operating as efficiently as possible on an asset by asset basis?
Okay,
That's
the
all.
key thing is to
Thank you, Mark.
if I can give some feedback. The key thing is to give guidance to people. What is the good ratio of the metric, and what's an improved metric?
Yes.
Where is the WUE or WUE, and where is the PUE good, and where is it can be, and the reuse factor? Because what I see is a lot of people in this writing all those guide standards and talking about it, and don't have a clue where the sweet spot is.
I think this is the case, and I mean this is where the OCP Ready program comes into play, where we can develop the site assessment so that we have more of these metrics, and get transparency from the colos to share their numbers, and then we can start comparing. So I think there's room for developing this and to open up and be more transparent. Okay, I think we're going to have to stop recording.
No.
Dropping off. So yeah, please come along. Thank you, Astrid. Thank you, David, very much for presenting. Really appreciate those insights. And please come along to further calls. We'll talk further about how we can get more sort of cross collaboration going between different associations. But thanks for sharing that. Really appreciate it.
No problem at all. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thanks for the presentation. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.